So for this video today, I thought it'd be interesting to talk about usability in e-commerce and why it's a skill in its own right, and also why there are a lot of people out there who think they understand usability and understand how users interact with websites, but when it actually comes down to it, they really don't. And I actually think that's an increasing problem. So I'm going to cover quite a few different topics on the video today, but hopefully you'll understand a little bit more by the end what understanding website usability really means and how you yourself can be better at it too. So what is usability? Well, in an e-commerce sense, which is what I'll focus on today for this video because we're a purely e-commerce focused agency, it's really about making the tasks the user is trying to achieve as easy and frictionless as possible for them to complete. So with e-commerce, the ultimate aim is to get someone to buy, and you can look at many other metrics and look at many other things to improve on the way to that journey. But ultimately, if people aren't buying from you, you have no business. So it's really, that is the key area in terms of what can we do to reduce friction, reduce anxiety, and ultimately from a user point of view, make it as seamless as possible and as the least frustrating possible experience for them to buy online and purchase from you, therefore enabling you to have a business. So one of the definitive books on usability, which I'll mention a little bit on this video today, is Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug. So this is the third edition. They're on a later edition now. I actually think there's a new edition coming at the end of 2026 as well. And although there are things in that book that I don't necessarily agree with, and things change over time, so there's quite a big section on taglines for logos in the third edition, for example, which were already kind of on the way out by then in terms of the importance, because so many major brands don't have a tagline under their logo. Users don't expect it anymore. That's the cognitive shift that comes with e-commerce trends when they change and things like that. And there's other things maybe I would have a slightly different view on, but the fundamentals are absolutely right. So one of the things he mentions at the start of this book is this section in terms of the importance of a usability professional and having one, and how you probably don't have one within your business. And that's very true today, even 10 years later. And I actually think the situation's got worse in that there are now many more people making websites. And there are lots of people who claim they understand usability and are experts in Crow and UX. But actually the number of people who really do and genuinely do understand usability, I think, is actually less as a proportion now than it was 10 years ago. And I think that's the issue when you're trying to get help with this and trying to understand how you can improve your website usability. There's a lot of people out there who will claim they can help you, but far fewer who actually can and do have that understanding. But that's one of the things I'll try and educate a little bit about on this video today, in terms of understanding what actually the key skills are to understand user behavior and be good at usability in an e-commerce sense. Before understanding what usability really is, it's important to understand what it definitely isn't. And there's quite a few things that I think people associate with usability and they probably shouldn't. So the first is website development. So this is increasingly common where an agency, for example, will build websites and then they'll suddenly decide overnight, oh, actually, because we've built a few Shopify websites, we're now experts in usability, we're experts in Crow, and they'll rebrand themselves. They'll even move away from saying we're a development agency to saying, no, we're a Crow usability specialist. And when you actually look at the work these guys are producing, more often than not, and this has happened for me across multiple agencies where people have employed these agencies, they've done the development with them, which is fine, and that's what they're specialists in, and then they start getting upsold to Crow and usability and improvements along those lines. And the work quite often is just not very well thought through, and they come to an agency like us to actually say, hang on, I feel like we're missing something here, and invariably they are. So I think there's that aspect that's really important to understand. And I understand if you're looking around that you might think that they go closely together, because quite often, like I say, development agencies just bolt it on. And then people like you in a client position who are looking where to invest think, okay, it's just an extension of web development. But it's not. It's actually a very different skill. And that's something that's really important to remember. Understanding usability is not the same, definitely not the same as understanding how to build a website. The second thing usability is definitely not is marketing. And I think that's a very common misconception as well. And I think, again, that's driven by people who worked in marketing or had marketing agencies thinking, oh, Crow's sexy, usability is the place to be, let's rebrand. Let's say we're experts in user behavior and start doing that as well. But the reality is, and I know this after well over 20 years working in e-commerce and understanding usability, that driving people to a website from a marketing perspective is very different to then understanding how users behave once they're on that website. And that's a really important differentiation. So again, if you're working with a marketing agency doing your digital ads and they suddenly say, hey, yeah, we're experts in Crow, we can do that for you as well, I would think carefully around if they actually have the expertise to deliver that. Is that enough, or do you actually need someone who genuinely and verifiably understands user behavior? The next logical question then is, what are the skills someone really needs to be good at understanding usability and understanding user behavior? And over the past 20 years, I've really narrowed this down to two things. The first one is empathy. So you have to be able to understand how different user types think who aren't similar to you. And that seems kind of obvious, but it's something a lot of people struggle with. I really like, actually, and I'll just show this here, the example from Steve Krug's book, Don't Make Me Think, which I referenced before, that you're really trying to understand users who have average or actually below average ability. You need to understand how those users think to be able to understand how they navigate your website and your e-commerce journey. And I think that's something a lot of people struggle with, particularly in senior kind of leadership positions, e-commerce owners or agency owners. And they maybe had, a good expensive education, the smart people. I think trying to relate to someone with below average ability, I think a lot of people really, really struggle with. Whereas I'm, inherently stupid. No, I'm not. But I've come from a different path in life, I suppose. So I really can relate to people who struggle online. And obviously I've done a lot of research as well, which I'll come on to in terms of justifying that and understanding that to really understand that further. But I think just naturally I already have that kind of empathy to understand different points of view. But the reality is a lot of people don't, and that's fine. And you can have a successful business and you can do many, many successful things without having empathy. But what you can't be is good at usability and good at understanding user behavior. The second thing is a little bit less obvious than empathy, but it's foresight. And what I mean by foresight is the ability to think, okay, if I perform this action in my business or in my normal life, this is the likely outcome. So if I storm in and think, this is a great idea, this is what I should do, can I then predict, actually, this is the most likely outcome? Do I think about that? Do I have the foresight to say, actually, if I do this, there's actually no positive outcome, so therefore I probably shouldn't do it. And that's really, really important in usability as well, to think about changes you're making and what you're doing, to actually think, okay, what is the likely outcome here? How will this affect users? Obviously, there can be multiple outcomes to making a change. But I think that foresight up front to understand, if I do this, this is the most likely outcome and there is no chance of this outcome, is really, really important. But I think what I've realized over 20 years of working in usability in e-commerce is that people who just don't naturally have that foresight, which is a lot of people, being honest, who in business who don't have that skill, are never good at usability. They can think they are, they can think they understand user behavior, but they very often get it wrong because they don't have the foresight to understand, okay, what will be the result of this action? What will be the most likely result? What is the unlikely result? What will definitely not happen? And I think if you understand that, and if you have general foresight in in how you conduct business and life in general, if you're able to have that skill and just think and rationalize the possible outcomes, you have a much better chance then of understanding user behavior. And if you have no foresight, if you're really bad at this, you will never ever be good at understanding usability or understanding user behavior. So assuming you have empathy and foresight and you want to understand more about your users, there's a lot of ways you can go about collecting that data. And you'll end up with the dreaded quantitative versus qualitative question. Now, obviously, the obvious answer is both are important in terms of data collection and understanding user behavior. I think in terms of quantitative data, what I would broadly say is that's useful for potentially identifying issues with usability and identifying friction points, but it won't give you the answers. And I think it's easy to take the wrong decision. So one of the things I'll quite often see is we'll look at the data, or an agency will look at the data and they'll say, okay, we need more people adding to basket. Therefore, we must do X, Y, Z. We must make the add to basket button bigger. We must make it sticky. We must change the color. We must change the wording. That isn't understanding user behavior. That's just looking at a piece of data and going, this is what we should do, without any understanding of usability, without any understanding of the why that metric isn't where you want it to be. And that's really, really important. And that's not, agencies that do that are not experts in usability. They don't understand user behavior. In the same way that those agencies probably go, oh, I've seen something great on a different website, we should copy that. That again isn't understanding user behavior. And quite often you see trends in e-commerce where a major site will do something, and then other sites will copy it. One of the most classic examples of that is infinite scroll on e-commerce category pages, which I'll probably do a separate video on because it's a personal bugbear of mine. And most sites now don't do it. But when it first launched, a few major sites did it, everyone copied it, and then obviously the few major sites realised actually this is really bad for usability and reverted. But those other lesser sites kept it, and I still see sites today asking for it and thinking it's good for usability when it's very, very clearly not. So you've got to watch out for trends like that. And I think also quite often major brands you think are doing well from the outside but aren't necessarily performing as well as you think. So one of the great examples of that in Northwest England was there were a lot of successful fast fashion brands where people would look at their sites and go, oh, this brand's growing really fast, their website must be good, they must understand usability, they must be doing things well. When in reality, all those brands doing pretty much to a letter, all of them, were just burning money unprofitably on digital marketing. And that's how they were growing. And in the end, they all went into administration. So then you've got to think, well, actually, maybe the website wasn't quite as good as we thought in terms of those ideas. So I think you've really got to be careful just taking a quant-only approach to data and just saying, okay, the data says we have an issue here, so therefore we should do this. We should just make something bigger, add something to the page, copy another website. That isn't understanding user behavior. It really, really isn't. That's just trying to kind of find a fix and randomly throwing a dart at a dartboard of fixes and hoping it sticks and hoping you get an improvement. And that's not something I would advocate. So look, data is definitely useful. It's always good to look and understand. And look, there might be rare cases where there is a major issue on the website that the data can, quant data can help you identify where, okay, something is actually broken. That's pretty rare now in modern e-commerce. By the time someone comes to us, they've got a website, they're turning over millions. You know, those massive issues have normally been eradicated by the time it gets to an agency like us. But that can help. But like I say, although the data is useful, it will tell you there might be an issue somewhere. It doesn't tell you why, and it certainly doesn't tell you how to fix it. So that's really important to keep in mind. So qualitative data actually is a lot more useful once you understand how to use it in terms of understanding user behavior. So there's lots of ways to collect this. So I spent a lot of time in the past doing moderated user testing, which is where you essentially sit behind one-way glass and you get someone to go through a website and you give them a set task or a group of people, and then you get insights from that. That kind of has a bit of a bad rap now in recent years, and I think people consider it less useful. I'm still a big advocate and I think it's useful, but you do have to bear in mind the limitations of it. So Steve Krug in his book mentions that every site should go through this process. I don't necessarily agree with that, and that might have changed in a later edition. It's still certainly valuable, but I think the big issue with moderated testing in that sense is the relation to intent. So one of the number one most important thing to consider in usability is the intent of the user, which I'll show here on this diagram. And this is how I like to break it down. And people break this down in different ways, but I've used this four bucket system for a long time, and it really represents everyone on the e-commerce site. So you have your definites, if you're lucky. So they are people who will buy no matter what. So no matter what you're testing, no matter what you show them, if I go to Amazon, for example, I want something, it doesn't matter what they're showing me. I will buy that session because I need something and I want to buy from them, and I've bought from them hundreds of times in the past. So if you're fortunate enough to have those definites, you're kind of wasting your time putting a test in front of them, for example, because they're going to buy whatever. And obviously they can try and sell me more. They can try and upsell Prime and so on, and different things like that, which is absolutely valid. But in terms of actual overall conversion and getting a sale, there's nothing really they can do to stop me, essentially, other than completely breaking the site. You then have possibles and probables, and they're really the users that you can influence. So when you're thinking about usability and things like split testing as well, which is very much connected, those are the groups of users that you can actually influence. So there are probables, who are people who are likely to buy but might not, and possibles who aren't likely to buy but could in this session. So that they do have sufficient intent to purchase. So that's really important to consider as well, because it's just those group of users, and that group of users for you could be quite small when you're thinking about testing. But it's probably the most important group in terms of understanding how you can improve usability on site and what improvements you can make. It's those users that you're trying to focus on. The final group is what I call the no way Jose's. So they are people who will definitely not buy in this session. So there's absolutely nothing you can do from a usability point of view to change the website, to split test something. There is nothing you can do in this session to get those users to buy. And that could be for a variety of reasons. It could be price, the value proposition, the offer, the actual products that you're selling. All of those things might not be right. But most of your users will be that group. And that's really important to understand as well when you're thinking about usability. So coming back to moderated testing, the issue is effectively everyone you put through a moderated test is a no way Jose, because they're not obviously interested in buying, because they're just doing it for the purposes of a test, but they're pretending to be a definite. So they're pretending they have maximum intent to purchase, and whatever happens, they will find a way through the site, unless your site is absolutely terrible, to buy something. So users are good at pretending, humans are good at pretending and pretending and kind of mimicking different levels of intent, but it's not the same as a real user going through your site. To watch someone pretending, who has no intent, pretending they have the absolute maximum intent, is not the same as a real user going through your site. So that's something really to keep in mind, and I think that's one of the reasons people are a little bit wary of moderated testing nowadays in terms of that. And also I think people are wary of sometimes as well of, you get 10 users and one user says something really loudly and you think, oh my god, we have to change our entire website because of that. And I think people are a little bit wary about making wholesale changes based on a small sample size as well. So I'm still an advocate of moderated testing, but I think the most important thing to understand when you're doing that, and in usability in general, is to make sure you understand how user intent relates to e-commerce purchasing, because it's the most important thing. You can have an absolutely terrible website, which is pretty terrible, but if you have high user intent, they will still buy. And that's why many rubbish websites that appear to be rubbish and look terrible turn over hundreds of millions, because they have that intent, because they've built the brand, they've built the brand loyalty, and users have that intent when they come to the site. So that's really, really important to understand from the offset, that user intent is really the most important thing in usability. Now, of course, you can get a lot of other qual data nowadays directly from your users. So screen recordings, very, very useful, I would say. And definitely something every expert in usability agency should be using and will be using to understand user behavior, because you're actually watching live users with varying levels of intent. And often, again, it's kind of similar where you don't need to change a thing just because one person can't click in the right place. That doesn't mean you need to change your entire website, but you can certainly pick up patterns and you can get good at building segments. You've got tools like Microsoft Clarity, which is now completely free for up to 1 million users a month, I think, which is quite a lot for most e-commerce sites. So you can definitely learn a lot from that. And you can also tie into that with survey systems as well. So I think, I've done a lot of big research pieces in the past where we've asked users quite long, lengthy survey data of selected users via email and so on to feedback. But you can collect little bits of data on the website as well. And obviously one of the favourites, the things like, was there anything that nearly stopped you purchasing today? And little questions like that can be quite powerful in terms of getting that qual data. So that's all very valuable as well in terms of building that picture and then understanding how to implement that. But obviously you still have to have that empathy to understand how the user is thinking, to relate that data to actually something you can change on site to make an improvement. So those sources as well, super, super valuable in terms of understanding user behavior. But to finish, I wanted to share actually what was the most important thing for me in my career in terms of understanding usability and understanding how users interact with websites. And obviously, I've got those base skills in terms of empathy and foresight, which I mentioned, which are really, really important. But actually, even though I've spent a huge amount of time in terms of qual and quant data and understanding that in terms of moderated testing and user research, lots and lots of that, and that's all valuable and that's all good stuff. But genuinely, the most valuable thing for me in my career, and something I would encourage anyone watching this to do who wants to understand users better and be better at usability, the most valuable thing I've done is actually speaking to real customers. So how did that happen? Well, in my first e-commerce job, we were working at a small business, essentially. So sub $1 million when I joined. It kind of grew to over 15, I think, by the time I left. But in those early days, we essentially had one person working on customer service, and I was there doing web stuff. And I was basically second in line. So if the customer service person was on a call or they were on holiday, I answered the phones. Which seems odd now, and that probably wouldn't happen nowadays for a lot of businesses. But actually, it was massively valuable for me because the business grew rapidly, and I answered probably over 1,000 calls in that time to real customers who were on our website. We were online only. Real customers, and it was quite a complicated website as well. It was personalized clothing, so there was a lot of complexity in terms of different customizations types, like print and embroidery. Certain products could have certain customizations, certain couldn't, and different products were obviously different price points. Some had quantity discounts, some didn't. It was a very complicated process, which obviously we improved over time, but actually speaking to customers was probably the most valuable insight I would say you can possibly get, because you're speaking to genuine people. These aren't people pretending to go through your website and mimicking and simulating intent. They're actually people who do genuinely want to buy, and they probably do if they're calling you, and they do have that genuine intent, but they've got stuck and there's a friction point. And I think speaking to those customers really gave me an incredible grounding that I have today, and I would say that's massively valuable. And I would encourage anyone, if you can, if you want to understand customers more, to speak to them. Try and spend some time in your customer service team. It will be an incredible experience for anyone in a UX or usability position. Now, obviously, if you're agency side, that's difficult because most businesses won't let you sit in their customer service team. I would say certainly the people with the most understanding, in my experience, of usability have spent time client side, have spent time within businesses, not just from an agency perspective. That's just me being brutally honest. No offense to any agencies out there doing great work. But I think that actual level of insight you get from speaking to real customers is absolutely invaluable. And I would encourage anyone, even people writing books on usability, if you haven't done that, to actually spend some time in a customer service team, speak to customers who are struggling on the website to find what they're looking for, or struggling to get through the process, or trying to address anxieties that they can't find the answers for quickly on the website, so they're calling you, or just people who want to chat, because that happens as well. But that, I would say, out of everything that I've done in my career, inadvertently, because it certainly wasn't something I signed up for. I didn't go into that role expecting to be answering customer calls. It just, it's just the way of a rapidly growing business, how that came about. But out of everything, all the quant data I've done, all the qualitative research I've done, which is huge, and thousands of hours of watching people go through websites, and actually speaking to customers by far was the most valuable insight you can get. So I would certainly encourage anyone who wants to be better at UX, better at usability, to try and do that if you can. And that's pretty much it for this video. So hopefully you found that interesting, and maybe it's given you a different perspective that you won't hear from a lot of people working in usability and UX, in terms of how to understand customers better and what you can do and what's important and what the skills are to look for if you're looking for someone to work with from a usability point of view. Obviously at Scale Beyond, I should say, we do have those skills. So if you're interested in improving your website UX and usability, or you're looking at split testing, which is a major service we offer, then obviously we can help you with that. There's a link below. But even if not, I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.